Hey everybody, before we get into the show, a quick announcement. Jenny's going to be presenting at the APGA Annual Conference 2025 in Denver. So if you're going to be out there, come join her on Wednesday afternoon. She's going to be talking about Google Ad Grants for public gardens. And then on Thursday morning, she's leading a panel discussion on influencer marketing, proven strategies to grow and diversify visitation. So hope to see you there.
You're listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast. Conversations on how nonprofit attractions are increasing attendance and sharing their missions through marketing. Your hosts are Ryan Dick and Jenny Williams of Attend Media.
Jenny, today's episode, when, why, and how to pay influencers. Jenny, we're doing another podcast episode about influencer marketing.
There's just so much to talk about.
Yeah, I think today we're going to go into the weeds a little bit. So we're going to be talking about financially compensating influencers. This is kind of a question that we get a lot about. And we've got an idea that most of our audience is working with influencers to some capacity. But in your opinion, are most paying, or where does the landscape lie?
Yeah, I think some of the bigger ones are paying, but it's sort of a trickling in, right? Like I think the majority of the influencers that we're working with are still on take a trade.
Okay. And then, let's set the stage. What is influencer marketing? How are we defining it in terms for local nonprofit cultural attractions?
Yeah. So it's somebody else creating content for you, right? So it's a user generated content, UGC content, that an influencer, someone with a following, their own audience is posting and creating for you. So it's that more authentic content, that kind of word of mouth content. It's, more organic. It feels less like an ad.
Right. And this stuff, these videos, this content is living and being promoted and shared through TikTok and Instagram and to an extent, Facebook and YouTube, correct?
Yep. That's primarily where this content lives.
All right. So where do you want to go with this? How do you want to start?
Well, I think kind of if we're thinking of paying influencers, we're really thinking of influencer marketing as part of our paid advertising, right? Paid influencers, paid advertising. And I think this is something that we kind of preach a lot of, really sort of maybe flipping how you're thinking about working with influencers or influencer marketing as a whole, because when we move it under paid advertising, we're going to treat it like our other paid advertising channels, right? And I think one of the most important things here is we're going to measure it like other paid advertising channels. And probably one of the biggest things that we've heard about influencer marketing is I don't really know what it does for me. Like, I know I'm supposed to be doing it, or I should be doing it, or yeah, so-and-so's video looked great when they came, but like, what is it doing for me? And I think that's when we move it under paid and we start measuring it, now we can start saying like, this actually is working for me, or it isn't, right? Like maybe we have the wrong influencer and we need to work with somebody else. But yeah, you're treating each one of these influencers as a, kind of like you would treat each print publication or each TV station or each radio station or, a creative on Meta, right? Like we've got to look at how it performs, just like we look at everything else we do.
Yeah, actually, we did a whole episode on this. It's aptly titled, Think of Your Influencer Marketing as Paid Advertising. Just recalling that conversation a little bit more, it's something where you have it on your media plan, right? There's TV, outdoor, Meta, and influencer marketing. That brings in that measurement piece, right? That brings in that, it didn't work for me. Like I ran one TV commercial one time and I don't know what it did for me. You just wouldn't say that if you have television as part of your advertising plan. But also think like, if it's going to be on our advertising plan, we have to plan for it. We have to budget for it. And in this case, we're talking about financially compensating influencers. So maybe there's a budget for that. We're also talking about putting paid advertising dollars behind the content that these influencers create. And then we can also talk about like budgeting for trade. A lot of times we're trading tickets for these influencers to come in, just like we would budget for trade if we're going to be working with radio stations. Like I'm going to trade tickets. It's not like you just have a million tickets to trade, right? We have a set budget to kind of help us guide us throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, some people trade is treated like cash, so it hits their bottom line the same way. So budgeting for trade is extremely important. And then for others, maybe they have a much more lax amount of tickets that they're able to give out for trade. But regardless, if we think about, kind of the example you gave of, trade for radio, right? That's pretty common. It's like, if you're putting together a paid schedule on a radio station, oftentimes you're looking for 10, 15, 20% in like a trade schedule as well too. But you're not just saying do whatever you want with that, right? Like you're giving,
Right.
there's still going to be a schedule, and maybe that schedule is not, evening drive every single day, but you're going to have a schedule that's not just like a total broad rotator that they can run whenever they want. Like there's still going to be some stipulations behind how it's done. And so I think that's how you have to start treating influencers as well too, is even if it's trade, like what is the value of the trade that you're giving them, and what is the value in return that they're giving you? So, and that could be tickets, and that could be more premium experiences and events as well too, that you're, able to offer them to sweeten the pot.
Well, okay. So, I love doing this. You're the media planner, media buyer. What should our budget be? Do you have any thoughts on, if you were to kind of go headfirst into this strategy, saying we're going to look at we're going to look at our influencer marketing as paid advertising. What's your guidelines on budgeting? Is this, well, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the question that I think we all kind of hate getting initially, like, what should I spend? It's like, well, what are your goals? Right. But, over the years, I've learned that you actually do need to have some kind of guardrail here or guidelines, to really think about how you're going to budget this. So, we've got kind of our, kind of media planning guideline. Actually did a whole episode on this, but we've got a document on the website as well too that you can go to. But we have a couple of like rules to be thinking through as you're putting together your media budget or your media plan. And there's two that stick out that I think can help guide how much to spend against influencers. And one is we say, really don't invest in anything if it's less than 5% of your budget, right? So get picky about, what you're running, what you're doing. And so I think you can look at that to say, okay, if I have a $100,000 budget, I'm going to put $5,000 aside to pay some influencers to come out. Obviously, that's just kind of a starting point, a guideline that you can use. You can, invest as much as you want here, right? But the other side of it is when we talk about influencer marketing, is we talk about amplifying it in our paid social campaigns. So the other kind of guideline that we have is you should be investing around 10% of your overall budget in paid social. And some of that budget can go to support the amplification of this influencer marketing. So if you're looking at this all together, your paid social and your influencer marketing, you're probably investing around 15% between the two of those, if not more. The smaller the budget you have, I think the larger that percentage is. But that's kind of one area, like how much am I going to pay influencers and how much support am I going to put behind it based off of my paid social allocation for the year? And that number is probably coming in that 10 to 15% range.
Yeah, and not to delve into this too much. Once again, we did a whole episode on it, but that minimum of 10% social media for your annual budget. And I think we have some language in our guide that talks about if your annual budget is, closer to that $200,000, $400,000, $500,000 mark, that percentage of share for social media should be a little bit higher than 10%, probably closer to 30, 40, 50%. Bottom line is we're just big believers in the power of social media. And this influencer marketing piece is a subset, a part of a paid social media plan. All right, Let's get into it. Why? Why would an attraction pay an influencer? First of all, I'm an attraction. I've got cool stuff to go look at. I love saying this. I'm not a dentist office. People are going to come to my attraction, post pictures, create videos, tag their friends, share with their followers, and they're all going to do it for free. And I don't have to do any work, and I don't have to pay. And I've got a million other things to do. Why would I take the time and effort to pay influencers?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about it as paid advertising, and if it's paid advertising, it's going to have a strategy behind it. Then I think when we start introducing this idea of paying an influencer, we can now start ensuring that we're selecting the right influencers. So people who are coming to you, you can have some really great influencers with really large following reach out because they really just love your attraction and want to promote it, right? That's awesome when that happens. But that doesn't always happen, right? Or it's not always the right audience that's coming to you asking for those tickets. So maybe you're an attraction that is opening a children's museum or a children's center, right? Like, and you don't normally have families come. You want to make sure that you're working with mom influencers, right? That might not be who's coming and knocking down the door for those free trade tickets to begin with. Or maybe you're in an area where you do really well with a particular age group, but you need to get younger, right? And so you need to introduce your attraction to a younger audience, or maybe a Hispanic audience, right? So maybe you have no content that is in Spanish language, right? And so now we can work with influencers to bring them in to help. We have something that appeals to them, and we want them to know that we're here, and we've got content, or we've got an attraction for them, right? So those are, I think, some ways that when we think about why pay, it's because we can really start getting more selective over the type of influencer that we want to work with, not just the size of influencer that we want to work with. So yeah, that's kind of always my number one. And when you're reaching out, when you're going through and you're sourcing, you're figuring out who's my target audience, who's my growth audience, how am I going to utilize influencers that fit in these different audience buckets, let's say. You're reaching out to them, like chances are they're going to be like, yeah, let's work with you. Here's my rate. So do expect, that cost to come into discussion when that happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if we're looking at this marketing tactic as part of paid advertising, we know as part of that is like, we need to go and spend dollars to go reach this particular audience, invite them to come into our attraction. And this falls in line with what you're saying. We can be picky on who we want to work with. All right. So that's one reason why to pay, finding that right influencer. What's number two?
You can direct them. So this is everything from the creative brief to the deliverable to, I really want you to come for a new event or exhibit that's opening versus just whenever they want to come. So this, just think about it. If you've got somebody who's reaching out in January and you're an outdoor, you're a zoo and it's cold outside and no one's coming. You may want to work with somebody in January to help kind of promote it when you're not running ad dollars, but you also may say, this isn't really going to help my attraction right now because no one's coming in the snow anyways, right? So, so when do you want them to come versus just when do they want to come? You're directing them in terms of what they're going to say, but you're not directing them in terms of exactly how to say it, right? So I want to make sure that I'm giving somebody some great background information of my attraction, but I'm not going to tell them like, here's a script for you to read off of. And then I think just directing them on that actual deliverable. So I want it posted on TikTok, or I want it posted on Instagram. I don't want it just posted wherever you want to post it, right? Like, or a lot of times people will, I guess, would trade. They might just post it to their main social handle, and you really want it cross promoted to YouTube and TikTok because you want to do some additional advertising in those particular channels. So you have more control over being able to do that if you're actually paying this person.
Yeah, or like compilation reels, like top 5 things to do in Dallas this weekend, and you're just jumbled in there with kind of your competitors.
Yeah.
If we pay them, we're getting dedicated content. We can dictate, I want it to be 15 seconds. I want it to be 30, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's kind of two things that I see a lot is you're kind of rolled in with a lot of other stuff because there really wasn't direction on how they had to use those. I think some attractions do a good job of, even on trade, they're giving some pretty specific directions on how to use it. And then the other one is just on the time, right? So I've seen some that are literally just like 6 seconds, one line of copy. And it's not like bad to have that, but if I want someone actually talking, if I want voiceover, if I want text overlay, if I want a little bit more information about how to get a ticket in that copy, if I'm paying them, I can direct that a little bit more.
Okay. Yep. So number one, right influencer, finding that audience that we want to invite in. Number two, you can give direction, right? That we can instruct the influencer to talk about these certain things. What's number three?
The biggest reason to pay is really to be able to amplify the content. So getting more usage out of this influencer content that's being created for you by putting it in ads. So in our social channels, this is typically what we refer to as like whitelisting. So it looks like it's coming from the influencer's handle, from their own page. It is coming from their own page, but you're promoting it and putting dollars behind it to run it as an ad. This is, going to be some of the most organic looking content that you can run in these social channels. And if we're directing them, right, we're telling them we want video and this video, these reels, or, video on TikTok, this is what performs best. And what oftentimes we find that a lot of attractions or advertisers actually lack in terms of having enough of this content. So these influencers now can be creating this content for you, and you can be amplifying it as part of your paid advertising strategy within specifically Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. And that's what you're talking about, like with getting ad codes, right? The influencer would send you an ad code or give you basically permission to use their content that they've produced in your advertising.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So they post it on that channel. And then when they post it, there's an ad code that they can pull from it and send it straight to us to then put into our business manager campaign. We are putting the dollars behind it, not the influencer themselves. But we're paying them for those usage rights, right? Think about a TV or radio spot. If you're going to use a voice talent, they need to know where and how that spot's running, because you're going to charge you differently if it's in one market or if it's national, right? So it's the same type of concept. If you're going to actually be using their content to promote your ticket sales, they're going to want to be compensated for that. I find it's typically not that much more. Some will just give it to you for no charge. Some will give it to you for a very low charge. Some want a lot of money for it. So it varies. There's not like a set standard rate for usage rates.
And then I'm going to pull back on something you said, enough, making sure that you have enough content. Like, how many influencers do you think an attraction should be using or engaging with throughout a year or a campaign?
Again, this will vary. But we generally say, going back to how many audiences you're trying to target, right? I want moms and I want, Hispanic, influencers, right? That's 2 audiences. We say have 2 to 3 influencers at minimum per audience, per campaign. So in that example, I'd have 2 to 3 moms, 2 to 3 Hispanic influencers over one campaign for 1 month. I've got 4 to 6 influencers that I'm working with for that 1 month period or so. So I like to think through it that way. The longer your campaign runs, the more content you're going to need. These platforms hit content wear out pretty quickly. There are some ways that you can refresh that creative and continue running it so that it doesn't wear out quite as fast. But I think just having those 2 to 3 influencers to give you 2 to 3 pieces of content per audience that you're looking at working with or reaching is kind of a baseline.
Sure. All right. So, if you're promoting your blockbuster event, maybe you have a couple of different audiences that you're bringing out. You mentioned moms, maybe Spanish speaking, and then the younger date night type of crowd. That's 3 different audiences. Some quick math here, 2 to 3, 10 for that big event, a couple more for the spring. So there could be a scenario where there's an attraction working with 10, 15, 20, 30 different influencers throughout the year. Mm-hmm. You kind of get to that idea. It's like, man, we got to be aggressive on how we can get that much talent in, and offering a few $100 in exchange for creating the video and getting that ad code can help you get to that level of different content to avoid this idea of content wear out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're probably going to have some combination of some who are going to do it for free and for just the tickets, and some combination of influencers who are going to want to work with you 2, 3, 4 times throughout the year, and they want to be compensated for that.
You're listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast. Conversations on how nonprofit attractions are increasing attendance and sharing their mission through marketing. Your hosts are Ryan Dick and Jenny Williams of Attend Media. Attend Media is a media planning and buying agency specializing in zoos, aquariums, gardens, and museums. For more information, please visit attend.media. Now, back to Ryan and Jenny.
All right, Jenny. So we were just talking about why we would pay influencers. And one of the reasons you gave is giving direction, right? We can tell these influencers a little bit more what we're expecting out of this. And this, telling them happens through what's called a creative brief. Tell us about your approach on creating a creative brief.
So a brief that you provided an influencer is obviously going to give them the information of who, what, when, where, why. But I think kind of the number one rule I would tell everybody when it comes to creative brief with influencers, don't say too much, right? Don't tell them don't direct them too much, right? The idea of this brief is to give them background information so that they can come up with this creative process and speak in their own tone. Same way you would give a creative agency a creative brief. You're not telling them, this is exactly what I want you to say and what I want the spot to look like. You're giving them all the information that they need to then go in and come up with a creative concept for you. So treat your influencers the same way, right?
And then you've given me a list of 6 must-haves to be in a creative brief. What's number 1?
So first is really just giving them some background information, whether that's on your attraction as a whole or a particular event or exhibit that you have them coming out for. And it's really just so that, they can go off and do their own research on you, but this is really just to make sure that they know all the main points that they need to know about what's happening. I like to say like a press release, especially if it's for an exhibit opening or an event, a press release can be enough information for that. You don't need pages and pages and pages of information here. Try to get it all to just one page on that. And you can always direct them to the website for more information. But you want them to come to your attraction and experience it like another visitor would, right? Or another guest would. So let them share their experience through their eyes without having to, tell them like, here's every step of the way.
All right. And number 2?
So include the goal of the campaign, right? Again, just like you would put in a brief to an agency. Are we trying to drive visits? Are we trying to drive ticket sales? Are we trying to share our mission or, conservation efforts? What is that goal that you're trying to do? Are you trying to reach a new audience? Those are, kind of just some of the basic information that they need to know. How are they going to drive success for you for this campaign? Is it just creating awareness, or should they be pushing a certain ticket package for you to or for someone to buy, right? So give them as much information about your campaign goals as possible. Again, the same way you would maybe brief an agency.
Got it. And number 3.
So the third thing is really what you expect from them, right? The deliverables. So this is everything from like mandating the content length. So we talked about some things that maybe some influencers do with ticket trade if they're not directed, right? You're in a compilation video of other parks and attractions in the market, or it's, just a few seconds long, right? Like what kind of content do you want from them? I tend to request 20 or 30-second reels for if I'm paying someone, and that's what I'm putting in a brief. And then it's usually like cross-promoting it on TikTok as well too. So the channels that you want to be in and the type of content you want them to create. If you don't direct them on this, they can create whatever they want, right? And there's nothing for you to go back to and say, wait a minute, I thought you were going to give me a video and you just put 2 images up in a carousel post. So that brief kind of is a setup for your contract as well too.
Oh, this makes sense. All right. Number 4.
Make sure you include all your mandatories, right? The handles that they need to use to tag you in, the specific names of the events so that they don't call it the wrong thing or shorten off the name, right? And then disclosures are really important. So especially if you're paying an influencer, they need to say that they were paid or they were hosted. So make sure that you're using all the proper disclosures there. When you do run it as an ad, it does automatically come up as a paid partnership, so you're covered there. But if you weren't running it as an ad, you'd want to make sure that they are using that, thank you for sponsoring this post or paid partnership or ad or hosted.
Got it. All right. And number 5 on your must-haves for a creative brief.
So we want everything to run as an ad. So how to get ad codes. I would instruct the influencers on how to do it. A lot of influencers who have larger followings are probably familiar with this, but just make sure you have the instructions for how they can get an ad code. If you need them to join an ad campaign like TikTok Creator Marketplace, which I think is just transitioning over into the business manager accounts now. But if there's anything specific that they need to do or join for you to be able to report back on the campaign, on what they're posting and creating for you, make sure you've got that in a brief as well.
Yeah, I like this. This is like the one-stop shop document to tell the influencer what's going on. Okay.
Yes,
yeah,
because what you don't want to do is going back and forth with 10, 15, 20 influencers of them all asking you, how do I do this? Where's that at? Right. So that starts to become a nightmare in managing them. So as much instruction, information of just like the process as a whole, I think is really important in a brief.
Well, I think this sets up number 6 quite nicely.
Yeah. So what do we do after the content is posted and created? So you can build in your approval process. Do you want to see it before it goes live? I do recommend if you're going to review it before it goes live, keep it to light edits, right? Did they check off all the check boxes on the brief that you agreed to? But as long as they've spelled everything correctly, they hit their minimums, everything looks nice, you got to let it go. Like, don't try to control it too much there. Give them a window to post. So if they're visiting on or whatever time they're visiting, like I like to say they'll post content within a 7-day window. I'll have some flexibility with some creators. I'm not going to like never work with somebody again because they post it one day late. But what I don't want is to have to follow up with several influencers to say, when are you going to post this? Right. So give them that window. I like 7 days typically.
And go ahead.
Well, and just last for reporting. So whether you use software or not, I think just having a particular, request or demand on your influencer is, especially if you're paying them, is completely fair here. So make sure they're following back up with the actual URL to the post so that you can more easily kind of aggregate all of that content. Or, like I use software, so they just upload that URL straight into the software. So again, just directing them on that full process so that you're not stuck after a campaign run saying like, you know what, I should really get a report together. And I don't even have links to all these ads. I got to go out and find them, right? Or now I need to go and request it off my really try to like the brief should have all of this information in it so that there's less back and forth email between you and all of these influencers that you might be working with or managing.
You kind of touched on this a minute ago, but in the editing portion, like giving feedback on the final content that the influencer produces for you, voiceover, text overlay, like, are you making that a requirement as well?
I do. So I give them the option. And, I'm thinking through how this is going to work as an ad. So I do like the text overlay for ads, but voiceover is fine too. So, and also just kind of what you want them to call out on copy. Again, I'm not giving them a script, but do I want them to mention prices? Do I want them to mention hours? Right. So just giving them a few bullet points there.
Yeah. Again, dates of the event, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But let them have some creative flexibility there. Don't try to write it out for them.
All right. And then what about music? Do you give them direction on music?
So music is kind of interesting. So the influencers themselves can post with any, trending audio on their own pages that's coming from like Instagram or TikTok, music library. But what you can't do is run any copyrighted music in an ad. So I've typically directed them just don't use copyrighted music, which they know based off of like it in the music kind of gallery, I guess, within setting up their content, they know if it's copyrighted or not. But there has been some changes. So in Meta Business Manager, for example, if I were to go try to repost or promote an influencer's content and they had copyrighted music in it, it's actually flagging it now and telling me like, you can't use this music, which I think is actually a really nice addition in the campaign manager. So I actually will have a choice to swap that music out with something else, which is nice because I don't have to go back to the influencer and ask them to do that for me. And then the influencer's organic content can actually still have some trendy music in it. Just the paid content wouldn't have that music, so we don't violate any copyright laws or anything like that. But yeah, just something to be aware of and keep in mind. You can either just tell them avoid it upfront altogether, or once you run it as an ad, you're going to need to make the changes there.
Cool. That is a nice feature. All right. Let's talk about when to pay influencers. I got a list of 3 kind of different scenarios or situations, but when is an attraction ready to kind of take that next step, if you will?
Yeah. What we talked about is part of your ad campaign, right? So you've got a campaign push coming up. You're opening a new exhibit. You've got an event coming out. It's a great time, obviously, to work with influencers, and you're able to source them and work with them and get them out like that opening weekend, right? So that you can get all of that fresh content like right early when it opens versus maybe several weeks later or a month later when people start hearing about it. And then they're like, ooh, can I come? I'll post about it, right? Like if I'm going to have influencers come, I want them to come at the beginning and create a lot of hype early on. So that's one time when you might want to look at actually paying influencers, right? Because again, you're kind of controlling when they come and directing them on what to say, or directing them on what to share, really. Another thing is just like smaller events. So maybe everyone reaches out to you for your huge holiday event, but no one's really reaching out to you for other smaller events throughout the year, or you don't really have a lot of ad creative for smaller events, especially like video creative throughout the year. So I also really like using influencers and paying them to come out for like a smaller event or exhibit. So it might be my weekly cocktail event. Maybe it's, the dog friendly Thursdays that we have. Maybe it's, the tea in the garden, right? Like something that maybe I just don't put as much ad dollars behind. These influencers are great because it's content that they're creating for you with video. It's UGC, so it's authentic and organic, and people don't scroll past it like they would an ad. And then it comes with an audience, right? So the creator themselves is bringing an audience to the table, and then you can put just a little bit of money behind it in a paid ad campaign to help generate those additional views. So love it for those smaller events.
Ooh, okay, can I pull on that thread a little bit? Like this, we had a guest on from a zoo, and they've had some success with a yappy hour. That would be a dog-friendly happy hour. Forgive me if I get this wrong, but held once a month or throughout a couple weekends, throughout a month. And I'm thinking, if I'm in the marketing team there, hey, we've got some extra budget that we can use to support this event, $2,000, $3,000 or whatever it may be, right? I'm not going to go create a radio ad, right? I'm not going to go change out my billboard creative, run a digital rotator. Sure, I'm probably going to use my social channels to promote it, put some paid dollars behind that. But this could be a great scenario to look at. Okay, where can we go get some dog-friendly, dog-focused influencers in our local market? Invite them in. We might have to pay them $100, $500, whatever that number is. Have them create the content. Use the rest of my budget to promote that type of content. That's an example of when to pay influencers.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Love that one.
All right. What else you got?
Looking at it from just turning somebody maybe from a one-time influencer or creator to more of a brand ambassador, right? So maybe they come out, even if it's for free or trade, and they produce some really great content. And it's like, that influencer is producing the type of content that really represents our brand well. Their audience, their following is who we want to see coming in or who we want to bring more of in. Like, I really want to work with this person long-term. Maybe I'm providing them a membership and then some, a financial compensation to come out 2, 3, 4 times throughout the year to share all of the different events and activities and, giving this audience a reason to maybe buy a membership because this influencer that they follow is coming all throughout the year to all of these different things that we're doing, right? So it's going to be, I'm not saying you can't find somebody who would come out just for ticket trade 4 or 5 times a year, but that's usually a situation where someone's going to say, okay, yeah, I'd love to continue, producing this content for you. Let's, work out some fair compensation for that as well too.
Yeah. And once you offer financial compensation, that kind of relationship changes, right? You get that opportunity to provide much more direction. Like, hey, I want you to go and highlight my children's garden that's all the way in the back of my attraction that doesn't get enough love, right? And you're providing that level of direction, that expectation, some financial compensation goes a long way to ensuring that you're going to get that content that you exactly want.
Yeah. And I find that they, especially some of the good influencers, like they also will bring ideas to you. So I love it when an influencer is like, hey, I have a great idea for how we could work together again, because oftentimes it's not what I or the client, are thinking about necessarily because they are the audience, right? So they'll come up with ideas and then we'll maybe work to flesh that out to spin it to support either an opening of an event or, a period when we're trying to bring in that particular audience. So it's when you're paying them, they'll often, as an ambassador, start bringing you some of those ideas as well too.
I'm going to add another scenario of when an attraction might be paying influencers. It's not on our list. I'm going rogue here, but I'm thinking a lot of the attractions that we work with are approached by maybe some of the more established, larger local influencers in the market, and they'll send an email saying, "Hey, I've got this great idea. Here's my rate card. It's $5,000." And then it's like, okay, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. We're going to get into negotiation tips and actually how to pay influencers. But I kind of just want to throw that out there in that when. So we'll talk about how to negotiate some of those times where you're getting approached and being asked for financial compensation. Okay, let's get into it. How to pay influencers. What do you got?
Yeah. So, again, assuming I've gone through my process, right, I've sourced the influencers that I want to come out to my attraction. I've identified my target and growth markets and kind of how they fit, how many I need for each one of these audiences that I'm focused on, how many campaigns I'm going to have running. Now the next step is I found them. I now need to go contact them, right? So, most influencers are going to have their contact information in their social on their social page, right? So you can 9 times out of 10 they'll have an email address, and that's what you're going to want to use. I like to keep everything through email to keep it organized versus like everything through DM. But certainly you can go that route if you can't find an email. But I like to send them an email, and I actually like to approach them with an offer. So rather than just sending an email saying like, "Hey, I like your content. Do you want to come? Here's some tickets." Or like, "What do you charge?" Right? Like, don't throw it back on them. Like, give them something to react to. So I like to start with how much we're willing to pay and what we're looking for. And there's kind of like a standard. I think we've shared this before. We say it's an industry standard, but it doesn't seem to be an industry standard on the influencer side because nobody seems to follow this rule. But it's, I think, a good way to get a starting point price for how much you should pay somebody. And that rate is $100 per 10,000 followers per piece of content. So if I work with an influencer and I want them to post, one video on Instagram, one reel on Instagram, and they have 10,000 followers, I might pay them $100. If they're going to post it on Instagram and TikTok, I might pay them $200, right? So that's just like one starting point that you can use for like budgeting how much to pay an influencer. I'll say if they have a really, really large following, you can probably get away with paying less than $100 per 10,000 followers. You're not going to pay less than $100. So if somebody has 2,000 followers, you're probably going to pay them $100 to come out and produce that content for you.
Would you pay somebody with only 2,000 followers?
I would. I have. Yes. Yeah. Usually my rate is just $100. If they have under 10,000 followers, that's what I'll pay them.
That seems a little high, though. I mean, 2,000 followers. Like, why would you even mess around with that?
Yeah, so it's all going to be about the content in that case. So again, maybe I'm looking for that really great mom influencer. Maybe I'm like on the outskirts of town, and this particular mom influencer posts just about like my suburbs, right? Like that's really, really important content, or that's a really important influencer that I would want to work with. So I'm still willing to pay. I'm not going to pay like somebody who just has like a general lifestyle, like doesn't even really talk about my city that much. Like I'm not going to pay them $100 for 2,000 followers. But if it's the right influencer with the right content, I will absolutely pay them.
Yeah, it's almost like thinking about it like you talk about hiring an ad agency to create a TV commercial. It's like I'm paying you $100 to create a mini TV commercial that's unique to your experience, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of put in that lens, like $100 is dirt cheap compared to, a real deal 30-second spot. I mean, it's not exactly apples to apples, but I see your point.
I think that's the other thing is like you're not just paying them for their followers. I mean, you're paying them for that content, right? Because if there's a financial compensation here, I expect to have usage rights and be able to repurpose this content. That's the other thing, right? If I can't get any of that, why pay for it, right? So.
Right. Yeah. Just to hammer that point home, it's you're paying for the content and then you're going to use your own ad dollars to promote that content beyond just those 2,000 followers.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So
how much is it going to cost me to hire someone to go produce that type of content for social? I'm not going to get it for less than $100. I know that.
Exactly. All right. So this $100 per 10,000 followers per piece of content. Are you always asking for a 30-second reel? Like what is kind of your mandatory when you're making this initial offer?
Yeah, I actually used to ask for less, but we tend to push to like a 20 or 30-second minimum for a reel or like a TikTok video. And that's just so that we can get more content after, after maybe we promote that or the creator posts it. Do we want to maybe chop that up and grab just like some of the best pieces of that content to put into other spots that we're going to run? So I generally ask for like a 20 or 30-second reel. And you can ask longer. I just ask that as a minimum. I have influencers who will post, almost a minute. And I think now the algorithms are like, if you get to a minute in views, you get, better compensation. Like everyone's pushing for like longer video content on these channels now. So, 30 seconds, I think like a few years ago, we've been like, oh my gosh, we need like 6, 10, but now it's like really pushing for that kind of 30-second to a minute long video.
And I know we touched on this earlier, but you're requiring some sort of voiceover or a text overlay?
Yes. Again, just so that there's more of an explanation around this event or, my attraction as a whole versus just, a couple of images or 5 seconds of video walking around the park. So.
All right. So put this all together for me. Like, what does a typical email look like? Are you offering $100? That's always your starting point. Like, what does like your most frequent offer look like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for most, I'm usually offering a few $100s. Again, it's based off of the followers, but not just the followers, right? Actually, I would encourage most people to look beyond followers, especially as they get bigger, because views and engagement are really important. If I'm, doing this to build awareness, then views is going to be a really big one that I'm concerned with. So I've had influencers that have 10 or 15,000 followers who will drive 10,000 average views on a video. And then I've had influencers that have 70, 80, 90,000 followers and they're not driving any more than 10,000 views on a video, right? So why am I going to pay that other person just for their followers if they're averaging the same amount of kind of views over all of their videos organically? Now, the difference would be if that person with 70,000 followers is just producing substantially better videos that gets higher engagement, then I might justify paying that person more. But there's other layers I'm looking at versus solely followers. It's just we've got that kind of rate that we can use to help determine, okay, are they going to go into bucket A, B, or C in terms of, maybe how much we're going to pay.
That's cool. All right. So it's, hey, Sugarberry3221. I really like your content that you produced in Dallas about restaurants. And I was thinking for $200, you could create a 30-second reel and post it on Instagram and provide an ad code. Is that kind of the template?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So we like bullet out the deliverables of what we expect. I want a 30-second reel on Instagram. I want it cross-posted on TikTok. I want an ad code for 30 days usage rights. And I want, to have the ability to repurpose this content over, the next 12 months.
All right. So they get back to you and say, I want $1 million. Can you give us some negotiation tips on working with these influencers?
Yeah. So I will say 50% of the time they'll come back and be like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. I love, XYZ attraction. I would be happy to do this at that rate. That all works for me. Half the time they get back and they're like, hey, I love XYZ attraction. I would be happy to do this. But yeah, my rate is $2,500, right? So maybe you threw out $250 and they're asking $2,500. So again, the purpose of kind of already doing your research and coming up with an amount that you're willing to pay is because like if I've done all that and I say, okay, I think the value here is $250 and they come back and say $2,500, it's just easy for me to say thanks, but no thanks. Like, hey, and it's always be nice, right? So these are real people that you're talking with and negotiating with. This isn't like a media vendor. But that's where I would just come back and say like, we're a nonprofit. We don't have unlimited budget. I would love to work with you if anything ever changes, but I can't come up that much. And I'd say about half the time they'll either ask for just a little bit more than what I'm asking for, and I might be willing to go up just a little bit more, or they're just going to come back and say, okay, that's fine. We'll move along, right? No, there's just no point in both of us wasting our time if we're so far off on that range. But the other thing that I can do is if we're close, so let's say maybe I throw out $250 and they say I want $750, right? That's not quite as extreme, but still like from a cash, like I have a budget, right? So I can only do so much. But what I might be able to say is, I can't really pay more, but I can give you a membership, or I can give you VIP tickets, or I can give you 4 tickets so that all your friends can get. Like, is there maybe something else? Maybe I have a little bit more flexibility with my trade that I'm able to give. So is there something else I can do here? And oftentimes you can tell just kind of in the response from the influencer, like you can tell if they like really want to do this or if they don't, like if they're only willing to do it for the money. They should be paid for it. Like this isn't, they're doing actual work for you, right? But you can just tell, like, are they going to be someone easy to work with? Are they going to be someone who wants to do this, just kind of based off of their communication style and how much they're willing to negotiate? So know what your max is so that you're not going to get, just say yes to whatever price they come back with.
I'll add something to the negotiation tips here. Okay, if you're really going to be putting paid advertising dollars behind their content, that's good for the influencer, right? They want to grow their followers. That's what helps them promote themselves and helps them get other paid partnerships, etc. So maybe that could be a kind of a negotiating tip or
Yes. Be careful with that though, because I think a lot of influencers have been burned there of just like, oh, well, we're going to give you tickets and we're going to promote you. So this is going to help you out. Like at the end of the day, think about the fact that they are actually producing content for you. And if you went and you paid somebody to go produce social video content for you, like you wouldn't just be like, I'm going to run it on my channel and you're going to get exposure and I'm going to tag you in it or something. Right. So think about that with influencers too. Like,
they're real people, Jenny, not just media
production.
vendors.
Yeah. You're paying for production here too. So,
all right. And then we kind of talked about the creative brief, but do you have like a contract that or it's separate than the brief, or is everything within the brief? What does the paperwork look like?
Yeah. So if there's financial compensation, there's absolutely a contract. I started anywhere from like just there's a 1-page contract that I send them through an e-sign, and it's got all the terms in terms of like what the deliverables are, when they're going to get paid, what, all normal terms and conditions that you'd have in any contract. I actually manage a lot of that through the software that I use for influencer management. So I can send my contracts directly through there and customize all my terms. But then I have, an easy way to keep track of who's approved what. There's no questions of like, well, I thought you were going to do this or that. Right. So yes, a contract is very important if there's going to be financial compensation. And you can even have like a very simple contract, even if there's trade, if you wanted to go that route to manage that.
And just to be clear, that's separate than the creative brief?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And then they sign the contract, they get the tickets, off they go. And do they just post, or do you review it first? How does that work?
Yeah. So kind of what we were talking about before, in that creative brief, you can kind of spell some of this out, but do they have to upload that content for you to review first? So you can build in a review process, and then, build in that posting window as well too. So 7 days within visits, or 3 days after, approval of the content, whatever that is.
And then how do you actually pay?
Yeah, a couple things here just to be aware of. One, I think this is obvious, but if they're over $600 in a year, you're going to have to 1099 each one of these. So if you're working with 10, 15, 20 influencers that you're paying and they're over $600 a piece, that's, that could be a big burden on your accounting team. And I think the other thing to think of is a lot of them don't take checks. Like they don't want to get paid in checks. Some of them will, but just, you need to know all of this up front. But we're typically paying through like Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, for, most of the influencers that we're working with. And then I think lastly, just like you need to pay fast. So this isn't something that you can drag out 30, 45-day terms. You do not want to have a bad reputation in the industry. These influencers they work together, they're tight, they share information, and they're going to share information if there's somebody that's not paying them. So I typically put in terms for like 14 or net 15 after they post content and send an invoice, and typically pay much faster than that.
Jenny, this is the deepest dive we've gone into influencer marketing yet. I like it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do another episode diving into more parts of how to manage influencers.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast. If you have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit our website at marketingattractionspodcast.com.